Hello and welcome to How to Change the Fix It Later Culture, Making DevOps Teams Care, a webinar brought to you in partnership with Comfort AG. My name's Catherine Cave. I'm the Associate Editor of SC Media and your host for the next hour. In this webinar, we're going to explore how agile environments can help developers and other DevOps professionals think about security and risk, all whilst focusing on the user experience and customer benefit. To discuss this in more detail, I've got three excellent speakers from a range of different companies. And so first of all, I've got Laurent Bognon, who's Senior Cloud Developer Advocate at Microsoft. Hello, Laurent. How are you? And can you give me a bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Laurent. Like you said, I work for Microsoft in Azure. So Cloud Advocate is basically a developer relationship role, and I'm helping people getting started and also getting deeper into our products. I'm more of a developer, a little bit less of an ops person, but there is also dev into DevOps. So I'm going to bring this perspective to the discussion, I hope.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Lots of hands-on experience. And so next we've got Tom Geraghty, who's Transformation Lead at Red Hat Open Innovation Labs. Hello, Tom. Can you just give me a little bit about yourself, please?
Hi, Catherine. Yes, great to be here. It's a great event. And so I'm Transformation Lead at Red Hat Open Innovation Labs. My background actually is in operations originally, and then I moved into management and leadership roles. My role now is to work with organizations and look at a transformational change, both from a technology delivery perspective and more organizational and culture perspective too.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And finally, we've got Felix Rosenberg, who's Product Manager at Comfort AG. Hi, Felix. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and what Comfort can offer, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you. My name is Felix Rosenberg. I'm working at the product team here at Comforte, coming also from a technology background, cybersecurity background, and being now responsible for the product strategy at Comforte. Generally speaking, Comforte offers a platform for data security, and as we want to keep the session today really focused on the topic, I'm just spending 1.5 minutes on what we do, and then we don't have any advertisements later on. So essentially, having a platform for data security, you are familiar with encryption probably, but as we all know, that's not the main solution to the problem. To actually solve the data security problem, we need more. We need to understand the data landscape. We need protection technologies, various protection technologies to ensure the confidentiality of the data. And of course, we need to include the operations part of it. And that's exactly what we are focusing on. We're helping enterprises worldwide to find the data, to apply protection technologies like encryption. But of course, we also offer kind of formal preserving protection technologies like tokenization, which help you to keep the utility of the data and with that reduce the exposure drastically, especially in a development environment. That is really interesting, but I might touch on that a little bit later. And what is key with every cybersecurity solution is that it actually works. A lot of concepts make sense, but if you can't get them working, they are basically useless. So that's what we are focusing on, making sure that you can actually manage, you can actually control your security, your data security from your CI/CD, from the DevOps environment. And that is kind of the key thing also for today's session. Looking at the bigger picture of what needs to change that we can shift security left and especially data security from my perspective. So really looking forward to a good and informative, educative session here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for sharing all your expertise with us today. Before we kick off, we have got an opportunity for you, the viewers, to ask our speakers questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, please do write them in the box at the video screen, at the bottom of the video screen, and we'll hopefully get to them at the end after this, very lively discussion. So without further ado, let's just start. And I think where we'd like to begin is really about setting the scene. So I mean, starting maybe perhaps from your perspective, Tom, where is the disconnect between DevOps and security? Where has it come from, and how can it be improved?
Well, I think it's really interesting because it's because we've maybe 10, 15 years ago we approached the differences between dev and ops, and the games they play. the way we're motivated differently to achieve different things. You know, ops have always been motivated to build reliable systems and keep things the same, and dev have always been motivated and incentivized to change things and make things happen faster. And there's a disconnect between the two, and rightfully so. We identified that and tried to fix it. And but you know, we were breaking down silos and creating cross-functional teams and bringing everyone together, and you know, bringing in testers and shifting testing left and doing all this stuff, and somehow security teams sort of got left out in the wilderness and left out in the cold a bit, and we didn't really bring them along for the ride. And I think that's why we are where we're here now, really.
And what's your take on that, Felix?
So I think I can only say that Tom made a great point there. From my perspective, if we look at the culture that comes with security, and if we look at it from a bigger picture, of course, there is kind of the auditing part. There's kind of the making sure that systems and change management happens in a controlled way. And yeah, the DevOps culture is something else. So you want to be agile. And what we need to make sure going forward is that security becomes as agile. It's not that we want to slow down development just to make sure that we are secure. And that's a huge challenge. I mean, if we look at the at the market, and if we look at what happens with breaches and all those things, we just talked to a big retail company in the US, and they told us that they have 700,000 incidents per day, meaning everything. There's kind of really small incidents, just kind of bots trying to find some missing patches or whatever. But this is a huge effort. And now if you try to be more agile, of course, that needs to happen in a controlled way, and that needs to happen with the right mindset and the right tools and the right strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And what about you, Laurent? You're coming from quite a different perspective again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in addition to everything that's being said, I think that what we saw in the past maybe 10 years or 15 years is really that the roles have changed so much, right? Like, I'm a developer, but more and more I have to worry about DevOps, and I have to worry about Ops even. Especially when I work with cloud instances, right? I mean, I am when we do platform as a service, when we take existing services and we leave part of the configuration to our cloud provider, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whoever, which is good because we don't have to worry about it. But it also means that I don't have a person who is in charge of that I can call, that is kind of available on demand. So I also have to worry a little bit about that, right? And so when I moved to Microsoft and came into the cloud world, I came from the client application development side, which means that I didn't know much about the cloud at all. And as I went through, learning the cloud, I also realized that now I have to worry about things that I didn't really worry as much before. Before, it was kind of, okay, what's the API definition and what's the token? This is the two things that I wanted to know, right? But suddenly I have to worry about, okay, if I go and set up an instance myself, which is very easy to do, right? I just go into a portal and I create something, or into a command line or whatever. Then I also have to worry about securing it. Like, do I have a valid certificate for that? Do I have, et cetera, et cetera? The cloud provider is going to take care of that, of some of that for me, but I always have to understand what they are doing. So this shift in the roles is really something we have observed a lot, and it goes in both ways, right? It means that ops people have to understand developer a little bit better, and dev people have to understand ops people better, which is great. But then there is also the security into all that, which everybody has to understand a little bit better. And I think that's the real challenge here, is that we have to learn new techniques that we didn't necessarily learn at school, and we are learning a little bit as we go, obviously, right? There are also trainings and courses for that. On the plus side, on the other hand, which makes me a little bit more optimistic, is that we also have a lot of automation into that, which is going to also take care of detecting breaches, for example. So as an example, when you set up database as a service in a cloud provider, they are also going to offer you some automated checks, like checking your data if there is an attack, checking if it is vulnerable, etc. And they are going to offer you some reports, etc. So there is also a little bit of automation, or quite a lot indeed of automation, which is going to help you. That's kind of my hope. But security is definitely tricky, and everybody has to take part into that these days, right?
Thank you very much. That's interesting. And so are you, broadly speaking, in agreement with that, Tom, that things are changing and perhaps improving with a bit of automation? What's your take on that sort of how things are changing side of things?
Yeah, I think things are definitely changing. Things are definitely changing for the better. Automation's an interesting point, but I think Laurent, you mentioned the word platform, and I think that's a really key point here, because what we're really looking at now, I feel, is platforms upon platforms, and Azure and AWS and hyperscalers in the cloud is one platform, and one really powerful approach that teams are beginning to take is the creation of internal platform teams. And what that can do is that can shift security left, because that begins to build in security to the platforms that the developers are building upon. So a big part of the role of a platform team, indeed maybe any team in any unit in a technology function, is to reduce the cognitive load of developers, so they have to think less about extraneous things, and they're applying their cognition to the real problem at hand, the real delivering business value. But that includes security. But the less they're forced to think about security, the better. And like we've said, like if that means automating or providing security as a platform, making things secure by default, creating trusted, secure software supply chains that mean that anything that gets released to production is already secure. And they're the sort of approaches that we're beginning to take now, and I think they're really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And what about you, Felix? What's your take on that agreement? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Laurent, if you had something to add in there. Sorry, Felix, did you have something? What's your take on the changing situation of this, whether it's improving or not?
I also agree that automation is key in making it easy, because if we look at the main goal of development, it is to bring us new features and new tools and new funny and fancy things. So they shouldn't worry too much about security, meaning if we can make it easier for them to actually do that by default, or do that included in their existing operations, that's awesome. But if we think about the does it really matter question that came up, why is it even important to put that security into the DevOps thing? If we think about what a developer does every day, and he wants to, for example, secure data, or he wants to secure his machine, or he wants to secure his microservice, for example, and he needs to call the security team, and they need to provision something, or they need to check, and they need to do something for 2 or 3 days that the developer doesn't know. It's a kind of black box. He's kind of hesitating to do that, of course, because he wants to move things forward. So with that culture, with having security as a black box that you need to call, and you need to set up a ticket, and then you wait, and it takes days, that doesn't work. So we definitely need to get the security closer, shift it left, get it closer to the development agility. That's absolutely important. And then security becomes an enabler. I'm always looking at it from the cybersecurity point of view. Cybersecurity in the past years was a lot seen as an insurance thing, or as something that blocks something, or that shrinks you stops you from being productive, essentially. With regulations, it can become something else. It can really become the enabler, meaning with the right security solutions, you can now do those projects, use the data, put it in the cloud, work with new tools in the cloud. And that's kind of the thing we need to change, we need to have gone forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw you nodding there, Lon. Was this something you wanted to add into that?
No, what I was thinking is that I think that shifting security left is really good because you bring them closer, but it's also important to give a lot of importance to that team. I know that for me as a developer at Microsoft, even though I'm a developer advocate, so I'm in developer relations, most of what I wrote are demos and sometimes some production code for my team, but I don't write products or anything. But there are two teams I don't want to hear from. It's legal and security, because I'm going to be in trouble if I get an email from those two. And sometimes it can be a rather simple email like, oh, dang, I committed a connection string to a demo machine in GitHub. And I get an email for that because we have automated tools who check that. And okay, that's bad because it means I need to purge my repo, and I'm going to spend probably 2 hours trying to remember how to do that first, and then after that doing it, right? But that's relatively simple. But it could be also that I get an email telling me, well, okay, this machine that you have, or this identity that you have, for example, you need to delete it because it could be a vector of attack. And the fact that we put this security team, that we give them so much importance, means that it sounds a little bit like I'm scared of them. It's not the case either, right? I mean, definitely we work in collaboration with them and everything, but still, if I get an email like that, I need to act on it immediately, right? So shifting security left to make them closer from developers, definitely you want to work in collaboration with them, but also there must be a culture that if you do something which goes against security, and this is detected, well, you need to act on it extremely fast, right? And I think this is something that we do pretty well.
Very interesting what you say about the legal point.
That's something else, and we are not going to go into it today, right?
So how do we start to sort of fix that culture? Perhaps I can start with you, Felix, on that.
Yeah, so I think we already touched a little bit on it. Kind of just by culture. It is really something that covers the whole, the whole topic or the whole enterprise, basically. The security team needs to change the ways they interact, and we just heard it. I mean, it's of course a situation that you don't want to get emails from legal and security. But yeah, working closer together is really important. That only works if there are procedures and policies, and if those things are set up correctly. Mm-hmm. But also tools need to change. And with security, we usually have that kind of culture which says, I don't want to change that system, or I don't want to change a running system. I don't want to exchange a security system that is in place or works and that we build up for years. But now we come to a point, especially with those microservices environments, with Kubernetes, with cloud native, with all those kind of new containerized environments, where the traditional security tools, they simply don't work with those environments. You don't get the visibility, you don't have the kind of controls to actually work with them. And that's why security teams need to really think about how they build their stack and how they put the DevSecOps integration and that kind of automation and that we talked about as a key requirement for every new purchase, meaning any solution you buy from now on needs to work seamlessly with those environments. If not, it should be a no-go. If that's still not an agile solution, it shouldn't be bought, because that kind of stops you from being agile. It stops the kind of DevOps team from, as we talked about, from producing what they need to produce to stay competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And just, I suppose, to bring it back to sort of very, very simple advice, do you think, Tom, there are any sort of quick wins or easy things that we can that we can do or have done that can bring that culture closer together?
So I don't know if they're quick wins, but there's certainly stuff.
Some wins.
Yeah. I'm reminded, Felix, some of what you were saying was reminding me of a great book by Manuel Page and Matt Skelton called Team Topologies. And this is about the way that teams are structured and the way that teams and the people within them interact. And I think that's something, because we talk about shifting security left, but we don't really talk about what that looks like in practice. And in practice, that's where people start to struggle. We're not quite sure, does that mean putting someone from security in a development team? in a DevOps team, does that mean putting someone from security in the platform team, or does it mean having champions? Maybe, and it probably does, but it probably means all of those things. And I think it's really interesting and useful. And Matt and Manuel talk about the different team types, which are platform teams and cross-functional teams and value streams. But they also talk about the 3 interaction modes: collaboration and facilitation and as a service. And I think it's really, really interesting, really powerful to think about security as in those interaction modes. Are security teams collaborating with the delivery teams, with DevOps teams? Because collaboration is a fantastically powerful way of working together, but it's not a long-term effective solution, because it's quite high bandwidth, it's quite hard work. Facilitation means more sort of a coaching, more sort of enabling of development and delivery teams. So that can be more powerful in the long run, because we're empowering delivery teams to be secure in their own right. And that can be a really, really powerful long-term strategy. But as we've just been talking about, and as Felix was alluding to, the security as a service, the security team or a security team providing secure stuff, secure tools, secure platforms as a service to delivery teams is really, really powerful. So those 3 interaction modes are really, I think, really useful and powerful ways to think about the team, with the way teams work together. And I'd love to talk about empathy and other stuff, and we're going to do that, I'm sure. But I'm sure someone else wants to comment on that.
Who do you think, perhaps keep staying with you, Tom, if that's all right, who do you think takes responsibility for this?
That's a good question. So DevOps as a movement was driven from the ground up. Like when DevOps started, DevOps wasn't a thing like ITIL or some framework that was imposed from the top down. DevOps grew from the bottom down, and it grew because we all knew it was fundamentally a good idea and a good thing to do, and it was technological, but it was also cultural. And so I would like to say, you know, the CISO is ultimately responsible, the CEO is ultimately responsible, but really we're all ultimately responsible, and we have to be, because that's the only way it's going to work, if we drive this and everyone gets on board and drives it from the bottom up. That's what, you know, DevOps was driven from the bottom up. DevSecOps must be driven from the bottom up too.
And what do you think of that, Laurent?
Yeah, it's a cultural change, and we've been through so many of them, right? I mean, I remember the days when source control was, you know, a server on my local network, and I was sending zip files to that, which is like first of all, it's not source control at all, and second of all, it's totally insecure, right? Because anybody walking in my office could, you know, just take that thing and think about how far we came, right? But I think this really needs, you were asking before, who is responsible for that? The answer really is everybody is, right? If you start deploying, you know, a test in the cloud, right? I mean, I work in the cloud, so obviously I'm in the cloud a lot. And it's not already running in HTTPS at the very least, then you're doing it wrong, right? It's like it should start really at the bottom. When you start and you create a new instance, you should already think about how do you secure it. And, you know, obviously there are different levels of security, right? The you know, HTTPS is like the lowest bar possible you can have. It's kind of available by default every time that you create something in a cloud provider. It makes sense. Then after that, okay, you're going to secure it more and more. But I would say this is really, it needs to be, you know, it's not something that you add like an additional layer on top when everything is done, right? It needs to be inside the architecture part. It needs to be inside the implementation part. You need to really understand. And I think that the only way to have that happening is to have, in addition to having a security team, we really need to educate the developers about that and tell them, well, look, first of all, that's what can happen, right? I mean, you know, the number of times that Azure is attacked, you know, every day is like, I don't even know the number because it's too big, it doesn't fit in my head, right? It's just constantly under attack. But what you need to also realize is that if you put stuff on your own server, in your own premise, that's going to be probably even worse, because not only you're going to be under attack, but also you're going to be less prepared, right? So there is also these big difficulties of having, most firms have really hybrid solutions where they have not only things in the cloud, but they have multiple clouds, and they have also stuff on their server, and everything needs to be secured all along the way. And the only way to achieve that is if you start thinking really from the start. So when you develop a new app, that's when really you can do that, right? You can come and say, all right, I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to start securing it. Obviously, it's factors are really way more complicated if you take an existing application that is not secure and that you need to secure it in addition, because then it becomes kind of a band-aid. But really, I think the important thing is really education, training, making sure that everybody understands what could be a vector of attack. Many developers don't really think about it, or they don't realize, right, that what is cross-origin scripting attacks or SQL scripting attacks, or these kind of things, right? So it's probably a good place to start by telling everybody, okay, this is what could happen if you don't do it, and then like this you kind of sensibilize people to this problem, I think.
And I think you make some very interesting points there, and based on your own experience and with the sort of, if you like, the push and pull of security and development, how easy is it to educate that development team? Is it something you've come across much, and what's been your experience of it?
Well, I mean, it's so obviously I'm in developer relations, so my job is to educate people, right? So I think that it's like everything. No, it's not easy because people are set in their ways, and suddenly you come and you tell them, well, no, instead of doing things like you have done for 25 years, you need to change them. Nobody likes to hear that, right? But at the same time, you can also I think that probably the best way to present that is by showing them, okay, this is what could happen. Like, this is a concrete example of what happened, right? Like, this firm got, and this is why it's very important every time that you have some attacks like that. I love when we have a postmortem, right? When we have a report afterwards. Microsoft does that. All the big cloud providers do that. When you have some attacks, when you have some incidents, when you have some failure, if it's a technical failure, we basically analyze it, and then after that we make these reports public, because we want people to understand what happened. And by doing that, I think it's a question of really piling on and continuing. It's basically an everyday thing. It needs to become an everyday thing. If you keep repeating the same thing every day, eventually, you're going to eat broccoli and possibly even like them, right? Because your mom keeps telling you, this is good for you, right? It's a little bit the same thing, except that, security can be also, I think that one thing which is really a good thing to do also is that it's really an interesting problem to solve. Or to try to solve. It's hard to solve, but for a developer like me, when I started realizing what was happening actually when I encrypt my data, or when I have role-based authentication or whatever, right? When I add security to my application, if you understand what's happening, and it's not just a constraint from above, and it's like, okay, you need to secure that or else, but you are invested into that, then of course it's way more interesting to learn about it.
That's very interesting. And just finally on this point, does it need a massive investment to do that? Just to hammer that point, do you think, to make that cultural change?
It's like everything, right? You can choose to educate your developers, and that's going to cost you money, or you can choose to not educate them, and then they're going to leave and go to a place where they are actually getting educated. So the alternative is not, do I want to spend money to educate them or not? The alternative is, do I want to have developers who know what they're doing or not, right? And I think that this is it's just part of the operational cost. It has to be part of that. It's not about, with the shift to the cloud, right? We have really shifted a lot from upfront costs to expenditure, etc., right, to operational costs. And that's also part of that, right? The training is part of that. The security is part of that. And it's just something you need to budget for. On the plus side, it means that you're not going to have to worry as much about, hiring some security guards for your own premises, because that's the cloud provider's problem. It's not your problem anymore. but it also means that you're going to shift some of those costs somewhere else. So I think it's just something that you need to take into account.
Thank you very much. I think that's very useful advice for the audience. So I guess moving on to our next question, how can DevOps move with agility but also take care of security? And how do you bring these two ends of the spectrum closer together? So I'm going to start with you on that, Felix, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. So we talked a lot about education and the DevOps side of it, or the development side of it. One thing that we also need to make sure is that the security team has that on their plate. So awareness from the security side is really important. And sometimes we see organizations where the development team has the kind of job, the mission to develop a new application, and they bring in the security team very late. But of course, it's also the security team's problem if they are not aware of things that are happening out there in the field. So it's really important that they kind of keep an eye on the development side of it, and really focus when building their strategies, also when creating their baselines, their security policies. As we talked about, for a developer, it might be a limiting thing to have that baseline when setting up a new device or setting up a new VM or whatever. But it is also from an educative perspective, it is really good for a developer to have a baseline, because now you know the procedure, now you know what you need to take care of. And of course, that gives you the security that what you do is in line with the overall security policy or the overall security baselines that the SEC team is creating. And another big topic I think is really important. Whenever we think about security, the key thing we want to protect is data, in essence. Yeah, and the main issues that we have nowadays are not necessarily those kind of misconfigurations that can be monitored and that can be discovered by automatic tools, because developers are aware of that. And a lot of developers I know, and also friends of mine, they have the security topic on their plate, especially because they have to secure their home environment and deal with all the notebooks of their family members. So usually you know a bit about security as a developer. When it comes to problematic situations, is if you need to use data, for example, regulated data, PII data, and you need to do something with it. And it happens way too easy that you kind of use data at the wrong place or treat data in the wrong way, because you're simply not aware of that this data shouldn't be treated that way or shouldn't be processed in that way. And that's kind of a key problem a lot of enterprises face. So either they shrink the access to data, meaning developers don't get access to the information. We have one client project where they correlate a lot of information to do data analytics in the cloud, where they had the big problem that a regulation was forcing them to protect the data, but the developers couldn't even do that with their current solutions. Yeah. So the key thing is really protecting the data in a way that you can work with it, that the utility is kept. And also the developers sometimes think, oh, zero trust is a bad thing because now I can't do what I want to do. But if we change the culture also from that perspective, seeing zero trust and the kind of least privilege idea as a parachute, meaning the developer doesn't necessarily have access to everything, but that's a good thing, because so you have not the unlimited possibilities to do something wrong with it. Yeah. So sometimes it's really good to have that kind of protected data by default and then deprotected only when necessary. And with modern technologies, as I said in the intro, you can actually keep the utility. So a lot of developers don't need access to the clear text data if you protect it in the right way. So I think that's two things. Kind of one thing, as I said, making sure that the security team also contributes to that kind of cultural change, and B, really focusing on the data instead of the perimeter around it and trying to prevent all the access points, because that's kind of not even possible today anymore.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. What's your take on that, Tom? Do you broadly agree? Do you have anything to add? How do you bring the two ends of that spectrum of DevOps and security together?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. This is where we're starting to get into the real meat of the practices and what we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. What it means to be secure reliable and resilient. And I think Felix was making a really interesting point about compliance and baselines, and I think that's fascinating. And Lauren was making a point about postmortems, and so I'm going to join that together by because we do postmortems. Delivery teams do postmortems, or at least they should. If they're not doing them, they really should start doing them. And they're a super powerful way of improving and getting better all the time. But we have to really avoid this temptation to do a postmortem and find the smoking gun, this single root cause that was the problem that caused this event, whether it's a small security event or a massive breach. And because then there's never just one single root cause of a failure. You know, if someone leaves an S3 bucket wide open for the public to access or something, that's a problem. But that was part of the problem, but that wasn't the root cause, because there were reasons, there were other things at play as to why that happened in the first place. And so postmortems should be engineered or pivoted more towards trying to find the systemic causes of failure and problems, and using stories. You know, we talk about user stories in Agile. We should be talking about developer experience stories in postmortems. And having conversations and making it a psychologically safe space to talk about failure and what went wrong and more importantly, and this is where I want to get to, there's a really interesting concept called safety 1 and safety 2. And safety 1 refers to how do we fix things that went wrong in the past and prevent them going wrong again in the future. But actually, what we know really, is that the big things that go wrong in the future, the big things that wake us up at night, are the things we could not predict. They're things we could not see coming. So safety 2 talks about ways to identify ways to keep getting better. Look at success, do postmortems, but do postmortems for when things go really well. Like if you go through a period of, we haven't had any security incidents, or this project got delivered really well, do a postmortem, find out what went really well, find out what the causes of success are, and start doing those more, because that's going to ultimately result in high reliability, more success, happier teams, better psychological safety, and more secure systems.
Mm-hmm.
Positive guidance. Yeah, I think that's a really, really important topic. Yeah. Actually being aware of things that happened well, or if somebody did something really good or discovered a security problem by himself or herself, that's really, really good to actually praise that and make sure that this is becoming visible, because that changes culture way better than negative or kind of beating on someone who did something bad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that very much as well. I think it's like praising success, super important. And also, stuff happens, right? It's going to happen anyway. It happens all the time. And if it happens, it's probably an education and training problem. And so let's not blame any individual. Let's not shift the blame to the interns, right? Happens way too often. If an intern deletes a production database, it's not the intern's fault. It's really, why did he have access to the production database in the first place to delete it? And why was there not an automated check of, to allow him to do that, or to prevent him in that case to do that? So, it's always important to understand. So that's why I really like what you said, Tom, before. Also, another thing I think which is interesting in terms of changing the culture, right, is the perception of the public is also changing very much. And every time that you have a breach, that you read in the news, passwords have been breached, or you can go on. Have I been pwned, and look for your password and see that, oh my God, they are already available, wide and broad, right? The media reporting that is also helping making the population sensitive to that. And that puts, of course, an additional layer of pressure. I know that when I get an email, when I resend my password and I get an email telling me my password in clear text, I'm going to change service because, you know, that's bad, right? It means they saved my password in clear text, so this is horrible. But of course, I'm a developer. I'm a little bit more technical than my parents, but at the same time, telling that to my parents and making them sensitive, you know, to that kind of things is also contributing in the wider public to this. And of course, it's also putting more pressure on people to actually change that. Things like two-factor authentication, you know, okay, if you get it per SMS, it's already better than nothing, but barely, right? What you really want is having another way of authentication, an app or whatever. Well, same thing, right? Go and tell that to your parents, go and tell that to everyone, because really this is a way to make them sensitive to that. And by having more and more people sensitive to that, and you know, GDPR is definitely contributing to that as well, with all kinds of regulations put in place. In Switzerland, we are not part of EU. I live in Zurich, but we are definitely, you know, participating to that, because the mere fact that everybody around us does it forces us to do it as well. And by extension, it means that the US is going to do that as well, because they are not going to abandon the market here. So regulations help, but I think even more than regulation is really this public awareness of how can we be better, which is going to help developers also with a little bit of pressure, probably, which, you know, can be taken in a negative aspect as well, but it's probably going to also help them make their point and saying, well, you know, we should pay attention to that, right?
And yeah, and especially with regulations, let me just add to that. I think I really like that point. The regulations really force us to look at that topic, also from a kind of the fees that are resulting. And I mean, if we look at the things that happen in the past to misconfigurations or data being exposed, I think it's really important that companies have that on their plate. And yeah, I mean, things are happening. And I think that came clear in the last two answers, in my opinion. We can't stop the big things or the big incidents from happening, because there are things we simply don't know. And in security, the more you learn about cybersecurity, the more you understand that you have no control, and there is always a zero-day exploit or something waiting around the corner, like what we have seen with the recent attacks that struck a lot of different enterprises. So the second floor is really important, making sure that you don't always have access, like the intern having access to the whole database, really making sure that you limit the access, least privilege, and protect the data as much as possible. And that's only possible with a kind of data-centric strategy. And that's something that Gartner suggests for 4 or 5 years now, really making sure that you keep an eye on the data and design everything around the data, so that whenever something happens, and things are happening, not necessarily the data gets exfiltrated or exposed. And that's kind of a key thing. So developers have a healthier and less stressful life, in essence, when dealing with things and when dealing with yeah, maybe not the complete data set.
Yeah, I really like that point. And I think you make a really good point about data and metrics as well, because and this almost cycles right back to the start. One of the things that we said right at the start, which is the different incentives that different teams have now. And you know, developers and delivery teams are focused on delivery, and over the past few years, DevOps, you know, we've built some DevOps metrics. We've built like the accelerate metrics, the DORA metrics, mean time between failures, mean time to resolution, change rate, and all that sort of stuff. And they're great. They are fantastic metrics at describing delivery and how fast we're going and how reliable we are, and that's fantastic. But what they're missing is a degree of measure of security. So what we've inadvertently done by measuring DevOps teams and incentivizing them with accelerate metrics, which are great, but the unintended consequences of that are that we've slightly ignored security, because there is no good security metric built into those delivery, into that quality of delivery, that speed of delivery. And one of the problems with that is, of course, is that to measure security is really hard, and we certainly don't want to be measuring security in the number of breaches that we had. You know, the mean time between breaches is not going to be a good measure of a successful business. And so I do think one of the things we need to do as an industry is slightly pivot the way we incentivize and measure DevOps and delivery teams, and provide some degree of a good metric that keeps them psychologically safe and able to deliver fast and not frozen by fear, but with a degree of incentivization for actually for a degree of security, whatever that measure is. And I you know, I'm not clever enough to come up with that metric. I'm hoping someone else does at some point, but I don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was laughing a little bit because I was thinking that you know, if your metric is oh great, you've not been hacked this year, right? This is probably not the best way to incentivize. But I think also very importantly, probably educating the managers is also very important, right? Because you know, I remember not that long ago when managers were going and measuring the efficiency of a developer by the number of lines of code that he was writing, which is obviously, you know, super flawed, right? I mean, honestly, a developer is more efficient if he deletes code rather than if he creates code, right? So it's kind of an internal joke that developers understand. But now we are at a point where, okay, that's hopefully out of the way, but now we can really spend that time educating the managers and making them understand what is the importance of that, and not necessarily with a culture of blame, like I was saying before, but much more with, I mean, this is really, you know, when you start to understand a little bit better what happens, right? It's also exciting to incentivize a developer to think about a scenario where his application could fail. And that could be from a technical standpoint. It could be, okay, I didn't think of that scenario, and then my application is going to crash. And then you can try to reproduce it or to simulate it on a, you know, in a deployment slot or whatever. And also the security thing, right? Like put yourself in the shoes of the bad guy, and then suddenly you have a feeling you're in a movie and hacking, you know, and this is kind of fun, right? So there is also a way to make this whole exercise interesting and fun at some level.
I think that's a really, that's a really good point. One of the things I'd always like to try, I've never managed to try yet, is to switch the roles of delivery teams, DevOps teams, and security teams in an organization, to see how this plays out. To give a security team the responsibility for running a service live in production for a month, and to help them build that empathy for the delivery team, the people who are responsible for running it, and flip it around the other way as well. Give a delivery team, a DevOps team, or development team the responsibility for making something else, something that they didn't build, secure and meet compliance and meet all these requirements and withstand all these attacks, and flip that game. And I think because building that empathy is so key, and you know, we can do this in a number of ways by switching these roles, or shadowing. Shadowing is a really effective way of doing it in my experience. I think that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. You having champions within the different teams is also really powerful. And there's practices like empathy mapping, and actually working with other people and carrying out these practices, so whiteboard type practices and conversation practices that help teams and people understand each other on a really deep level, that are also enjoyable. Like they're enjoyable things to do, but they also help our teams understand each other and understand the different incentives and the goals that they've got to attain.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you I think you've got some fantastic advice here, you know, role swapping, positive post-mortems, better metrics. Is there anything else you think that's missing at the moment? And perhaps I'll go to you, Felix, for that.
Yeah, I think there's always something missing, and it really depends on the company. So there's so many things you can do. What we really need is, in my opinion, is awareness of the problem still. While we three here are talking very openly about our ideas, and I think it's great to do that, especially in larger enterprises and the senior management positions. They need to be aware of that issue and be aware that things go wrong if you don't bring those two sides of the coin together. Meaning making sure that the security team is really helping with the agility of the company and supporting the fast growth and movement of the company, and also the development team, as we talked quite a bit about, being aware of security. So there's kind of, and Lauren really talked about that. It needs to be a mixed situation, and the role play thing also plays in that part. Basically, you need to be, both departments need to be aware of each other and work together, and then yeah, the awareness is key in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that there are sort of any key obstacles that are stopping this stuff coming together at the moment? And maybe I'll start with you, Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, there is always, it's always a balance between, how much time do you want to spend educating your team? How much time do you want to spend? But again, I think it's really a question of perspective, right? If you consider that security is a layer that you add on top of everything once you're done, first of all, what does done mean, right? I mean, done in software doesn't mean anything anymore, right? Software is never done, right? So when do you apply the security? If you do it when you're done, the answer is never, right? So that doesn't work this way. So it's really a question of shifting perspectives and understanding that, okay, this is just like Ops is now a part of Dev with DevOps, security is part of that as well. It needs to be there from the start, and it's really, is it going to cost money? Well, yeah, but less than losing your whole database to an attacker, or having ransomware put on your servers and having to pay, I don't know how many millions, to unlock your files, right? So, and also if you do it in a regular basis from the start, etc., this is going to create better developers, better engineers, which means that they are going to contribute to you having a better business, because they are also going to be faster in creating those security layers and securing the the workspace and everything. And so in the end, it's really, again, right, it's about shifting this thinking of, I don't have a budget training per year for my developers. Of course, we need a budget training per year, but really it's almost a budget training per day, right? I mean, it's something that you pass into the operational part of your business, and the training, on-the-job training is super important. Shadowing, like Tom was mentioning before, I think is really a great idea. I mean, I'd love to do that. In fact, I'm going to check with my manager if I can do that at some point, because I love the idea, right? I mean, changing team and going to a totally different team and working with them, it's a great way to learn. And also it's a great way to meet each other and to talk. And so I think it just has to be part from the everyday operation of your enterprise.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on some really interesting points as well there. And one of the points I think is that there's often not a lot of psychological safety in the space where security people responsible for security interact with development and DevOps teams, and there's often a bit of an antagonistic role between them, or there's conflict between them, but there's certainly not psychological safety. And I think psychological safety, I talk about psychological safety a lot, I know, but I think it's so fundamental, particularly to things like security, because in order for us to be secure, we've got to have teams. We've got to be in a space where people in those teams can put their hand up and say, I think I've just spotted something wrong over here, or I've made a mistake. Actually, I configured this wrongly. It's in production, but I did a bad thing. Please don't sack me. But for them to be in a psychologically safe enough space for them to reach out to security, to InfoSec teams and say, we've made a bit of a blunder, or we've spotted a problem, is really, really powerful. And to have that safe space where teams are able to do that I'm convinced I'm actually convinced that a lack of psychological safety was one of the causes, not the root cause, there is no root cause, but it's one of the systemic causes behind most, if not nearly all, security blunders and breaches that we've seen in technology for the past 20 or 30 years. Because someone somewhere probably knew something, or had an inkling that something might be wrong or something might not be right, and could have put a hand up and said, I think we should maybe fix that. or doing that is a bad idea. And to have that psychological safety, this ability to admit mistakes, because we know that teams that admit their mistakes and ask for help when they need it perform way better than teams that don't have that ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that very much. And to kind of bounce back on something I said before, right? I said there are two departments I don't want to get an email from, is legal and security. But at the same time, why don't I want to get an email from them is because I need to drop what I'm doing right now and solve it, right? So this is, that has an impact on my day-to-day for sure. But at the same time, I also know I'm not going to get fired. I mean, there is also this level of security I have, which means that, well, okay, like I said before, stuff happens. And sometimes you learn from it and don't put blame on people. So I really like what you are saying. I think this is a great approach.
And what is also really important is changing the kind of how cybersecurity is perceived from the development team. I think that's kind of really interesting. Making sure that a developer sees that as a, as I said, parachute or something that really helps them to actually get things done without worrying a lot more about the security, by actually working closer with the cybersecurity team and letting them do their job and being part of it. And I think, as I said, data-centric security, kind of really focusing on the data and protecting the data is really a key to that, because that really helps you to, worry less about the exposure, which is usually the key thing. I mean, if we misconfigure S3 bucket or whatever, that's kind of the thing we worry about. So that if we can take that out of the equation, that is helping developers quite a bit. So we see quite a few happy faces out there when they have the feeling, okay, I can play a bit more with the data because I have to worry less about the exposure of real sensitive information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I think we've got some really lovely positive advice here, making the departments just much more positive places where we're all looking out for each other, swapping roles and learning. So we've just got a few minutes left at the end of this now. So very quickly, we've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I don't think, to be honest, we'll have time to get through all of them. But the first one is, what are the best and worst examples of DevOps SOC working together? And perhaps just, if I could just very quickly go through all of you, perhaps I'll start with you, Laurent.
You know, I don't really have a strong example in mind, like a concrete example to name, but I know that for me it was eye-opening when I suddenly realized that if I automate things, it means that I have less work to do, and the thing is, sometimes I have the feeling that, oh, it's additional work that I need to do up front on my project, and that's probably true. But come back 6 months later and try to remember how you were deploying your solution and how you were securing your solution and all that, and I can guarantee you in 6 months you won't remember. Well, if you automate it from the start, you won't have to remember, because the automation is basically doing it for you. So documenting what you do is important, definitely, but automating is probably even more important. So yeah, for me it was an eye-opener. I mean, we have an internal joke at Microsoft that you shouldn't right-click publish, because we have some tools where you can right-click on your solution and then it's going to publish it to the cloud. That works, that definitely works, but at the same time, it's not really a great practice. So now we have tools who help you automate, who help you build, pipelines and all kinds of workflows and actions, etc., to help you with that. And for me as a developer, it was scary at first, because I didn't understand. First of all, it was something new I had to learn, which I love learning. This is great, but there is always this, and believe me, I have 30 years experience in the field, and yet when I have something new to learn, I still have this feeling in my stomach, the butterflies, and oh, am I going to actually understand it? Am I going to be able, right? It's nothing to be ashamed of, right? So, but once you do that, and then you feel that, oh wow, it actually works, then the feeling is really fantastic. So I would say, don't worry about not knowing something. Learn it, and definitely let the automation take care of that for you. If you can, that's definitely going to make your life simpler on the long run.
And what about you, Tom?
So one of the reasons I'm so passionate about psychological safety is because a few years back I was working with a team who really were psychologically safe within themselves, but we also had fantastic tooling at the time, really good solid automation that would catch errors and misconfigurations before they were in production. So we had this magic combination of practical safety. People knew that they could release and deploy and configure without any problems hitting the real world. So that was shifting left practically. But we also had this psychological safety that enabled people to shift left mentally and raise issues and ask for help and say, there's this thing I'm not quite sure how to do. There's a problem I'm facing. I don't quite understand it, or I think I've done something not quite right. Can you check it early on? And so that's shifting left again. And this combinatorial magic of psychological safety and practical safety shifted everything left, and just was a magic place to be.
Wonderful. And finally, you, Felix, if you could just share best or worst examples of DevOps SOC working together, anything practical you've got, and then I think we'll have to end there.
Yeah, I have a good example, really quick. American insurance company, Fortune 250, and it's usually that the bigger companies have a better hold on this. I have the feeling, because there's a budget, there are more roles. There's usually someone dedicated to taking care of DevSecOps probably. But what was quite interesting to see that there was a regulation requiring them to do something, to actually continue with their projects, new regulation. The reg team basically raised the issue, and then the whole rest of the team was working together to solve it, to actually get the product done, which is the key thing. And I think that's kind of was a good culture, in my opinion. So I think that's everybody working on the same issue and seeing the bigger challenge and actually communicating that, so that everybody kind of is aware of what they are doing and why what they contribute is valuable. I think that already does a big thing in bringing everything together.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, thank you, Laurent, Felix and Tom, for sharing your advice. You've been really passionate and had very diverse perspective, which has been fantastic. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, so I hope everyone's enjoyed the webinar. Just a quick reminder that this session will be available on demand from tomorrow. But thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.